Herby, are you okay? So I would like to call the first speaker, Herby Lissade. He is the engineer of the California Department of the Transportation in the United States. The title of his presentation is Hazard Mapping and Resilience, right? Okay. We need to prepare the presentation. Okay?
I'm just going to go ahead and turn this on. Hi, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Herby Lissade. I am the Assistant Division Chief in responsible charge for the Maintenance, Technical, and Field Support Offices for the California Department of Transportation. And thank you all for inviting me to your workshop. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can in about 20 minutes. Okay. Technical difficulties. So I just want to say the development of hazard maps for transportation networks enhances the resilience of the system. The hazard map identifies a hazard, usually a natural hazard in a particular area on the network. This information can be used in the planning and design of a transportation system. The information can also be used in developing trade routes, corridors that incorporate identified hazards, helping with the continuity of operations as well as economic resilience tied to network performance and safety. To put California in context on the world stage, we have the world's 5th largest economy. We have about 40 million people that live in the state of California. The gross domestic product is about 2.7 trillion US dollars. Mexico, our neighbor to the south, has the world's 15th largest economy of $1.05 trillion and about 131 million people. Caltrans has about 12 district offices as well as a headquarters office in Sacramento. The state DOT's major responsibilities: highways, transit, freight and passenger rail, ports and ferries, general and commercial aviation facilities, bike, pedestrian, motor carrier, motor vehicle services, and state patrol. The United States has 50 states, and California is just one of those 50 states. The state DOTs are operators of the system that they service and maintain. We also own the infrastructure. So DOTs own and operate 1.8 trillion lane miles of transportation infrastructure, 273,200 bridges, 5 billion daily vehicle miles, 92 billion a year needed to just to preserve the system without extra security. I'm going to go into hazard mapping. We should do our best to identify all potential hazards that we may encounter and have plans. And hazard mapping is a huge tool in this area in place to help mitigate for these occurrences. And we have an agency, a federal agency called FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and we have several, 18 recognized disaster types: chemical emergencies, dam failures, earthquake, fire, wildfire, floods, hazardous materials, heat, hurricane, landslide, nuclear power plant emergencies, terrorism, thunderstorm, tornado, tsunami, volcano, wildfire, winter storm, and cyber attack, and that's for all 50 states. Luckily for California, we have all these hazards just in one state. So mapping can be of a single hazard, such as fault maps and floodplain maps, or several hazard maps can be combined in a single map to give a composite picture of natural hazards. The benefit of the individual mapping technique is visual form of information for decision makers and planners, which is easily understood. You know, one picture tells 1,000 words. Multiple hazard maps provide the possible of common mitigation technique recommendations, sub-areas requiring more information, additional assessments, or special hazard reduction techniques can be identified, and land use decisions can be based on all hazard considerations simultaneously, all at once. The limitations of the technique are the volume of information needed for natural hazard management, particularly in the context of integrated development mapping, often exceeds the capacity of manual methods. and thus drives the use of computer-assisted techniques such as GIS-based tools. And one thing I like to always mention is governance. What gives you the authority to do the things that you do? It is important that we understand what you can do and cannot do within the laws that govern you and your organization in planning for and responding to emergencies. You should know what you can do before the emergency happens. I was part of the Asian Pacific Economic Corporation helping develop the 7 principles of supply chain resilience. And APEC has 7 principles defined. Hazard mapping is a key component of the 7 principles. Share information and knowledge, promote disaster risk management and hazard mapping, support planning and business continuity management, promote best practice policy, regulations, flexibility, leverage regional cooperation to support the supply chain, promote critical infrastructure protection and intermodalism, and recognize and promote best practice in human resource and capacity management. That brings me to another slide I'd like to talk about, is human behavior and emergency management planning. During times of disasters, people will do what is in their best interest, and plans should address this concern. Certain things about human nature cannot be fixed. People will do what's in their best interest. So development of hazard mapping and the subsequent use of the maps should include the influences and impacts of human behavior and response. The Institute of Medicine of the National Academies has created a document that may help you in disaster planning recovery from a community health perspective. This document is available online and it's free. Besides bringing back the infrastructure that we use, the document looks at the opportunity of making the impacted community more resilient and sustainable. And the use of hazard mapping will definitely be key in accomplishing this task. And I was part of this task force. This document is useful for those who are interested in how our transportation assets are tied into all aspects of community health, resilience, and sustainability efforts. It is important to consider the users of the system in all aspects of emergency management, especially in building back in a resilient and sustainable manner after a disaster. So you got to think about who's using your system. So at the California Department of Transportation, we use hazard mapping extensively in all phases of emergency management. Much of our state's and nation's economy is linked to the transportation system. For example, a hazard in our central region of California may have national and international impacts. So some of the maps that we keep on file include, we get wildland fire, so fire danger rating maps for areas of high fire probability, state responsibility areas, the maps that show what we should respond to, emergency supply chain maps. These are maps that show where supplies are at, shake maps, which are earthquake intensity and possible impact, landslides and rock slides, areas prone to rock slides, flood mapping, and then inundation mapping. We have tons of earthquakes in California, as you do in Chile. So we have a product called ShakeCast, and ShakeCast creates a map called the Shake Map. The Shake Map shows where the most intensity of the earthquake might be. You know, the earthquake might happen, let's say, in downtown LA, but the most shaking might be 60 miles away based on the geology. So we have a product again called ShakeCast that helps identify bridges, buildings, transportation infrastructure, culverts, utilities, and it prioritizes what our field responders go and look at. It could also be used for training and exercises, and I'll show you the product. So on the left is a shake map, on the top is a bridge assessment summary, and this helps prioritize which bridges our field staff go to look at. So after an earthquake, instead of trying to figure out where the epicenter is at and looking at 10 or 20 mile radius of the epicenter, this actually helps prioritizes which bridge to go and look at based on the geology, not where the earthquake is, but where the highest probability of the shaking is that impacts the bridges or the buildings or whatever type of infrastructure we're modeling. We have a tool called Emergency Management Common Operation Picture Tool. This is where we store all our hazard maps, all our GIS maps. All 12 districts have an opportunity to tap into this system. Emergency supply chain maps. Just tons of different types of maps are available from anywhere in the world that our emergency managers can take a look at and respond to. So mitigation, hazard mapping helps to identify, prioritize, and allocate resources to populations in potential high-risk areas for safe evacuation, rescue, relief, and rehabilitation. So why is the topic of hazard mapping, resilience, emergency management, and infrastructure protection as applied to transportation systems so important? The transportation systems are fundamental to a civilization. Whether we are talking about the Roman Empire, today's modern society, a resilient transportation system is key to a nation's greatness. So I'd like to show you a video. We have a lot of wildland fires in California. One thing we had was 4 years of drought. And the 4 years of drought changed the geomorphology of the soil, especially in the desert. So we had a lot of flash floods. But this one particular flood that we didn't know about really decimated or impacted a segment of highway, and I'd like to show you a video of what occurred. We use USGS, United States Geological Survey, to help us do post-fire assessment of the infrastructure and the wildland fires. Something similar happened because of 4 years of drought. The 4 years of drought baked the soil. So if we can click on the first video. This is Route 58, a major truck corridor through the Mojave Desert in Southern California. What's happening is a flash flood. This is a trucker, and these are cars that are floating around. You got K-rail, and it's okay. And this water is coming from off our system. So there's not a whole lot that we can do to mitigate for that other than to try to work with the landowners. But this trucker is actually is a truck driver, and he's trying to call for help. He's trying to call 911, and there's nothing that we can do to help him. He's just stuck, and the cars are floating around, and the trucks are floating around. Well, we can show the next video. That's all right. And the next video shows you what happened. Yeah, that one. That's okay. This is a drone. This is a drone that went up to do an assessment for us, and you can see where the water came from. This is probably a route that has maybe 10 to 15,000 vehicles a day, and during a holiday season when more trucks are on the road, it's probably 20, 30,000 average daily traffic. The K-rail in the median stopped the vehicles from being pushed over, so a lot of people were saved by having the K-rail there. So what you see is trucks, cars. Luckily, no one died. People did die, but they died off our system. So it took us a few weeks to clear this out. Again, it may not look like a lot of vehicles, but luckily, we were able to stop more vehicles from going through. And this is because of climate change, extreme weather, whatever you want to call it. But this is something that we have to respond to on a regular basis. The same thing happened in LA on another route, Route 5 through LA. But we didn't know about this until the next day because no one expected this to happen. So it took us a while to respond to this. So if you're ever in California driving through Mojave, that's the road. Okay. Yeah, it's fine. So after this event, we went out and looked at all the areas around the state that was impacted through drought. And we created hazard maps because of that, and we looked at the drainage, and we put out director's orders, emergency contracts to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So there are so many people depending on our roads, so many interdependencies, as you all know, that we must invest in making the transportation system as resilient as possible. And hazard mapping is one of the many tools that we may have. And the one thing I like to tell people is that, the cost of disruption, that one little route might be costing us $5 million an hour in terms of lost commerce. So there's a dollar amount, not just to the damage to the vehicles, but to the economy when the route is shut down. Well, that's it. Got any questions later?
Okay. Thank you very much.